Ever wondered why some organizations unlock lasting well-being and inclusion while others struggle with burnout and disconnection? I'm Dr. Frank Douglas, the host of the Antifragility Reframe podcast. In this episode, we will dive into real-world strategies for building and sustaining restorative work cultures that make a difference in one's everyday life. My guest today is Ms. Faith Clarke. She is an organizational health and inclusion specialist. She works primarily with nonprofit leaders and their organizations, helping them to develop restorative cultures. She also has been challenged in a sense, in that she has, I think, her firstborn, a son on the autism spectrum, which led her to homeschool, and as a matter of fact, led her to her passion of restorative cultures, not only for the work, but also for the home, for her as a mother. Ms. Clarke, welcome.
Dr. Douglas, it's lovely to be here talking with you.
Share with us some of your journey.
Well, I think, so many parents, when they are faced with something challenging like autism, we kind of, especially type A type, people who are well educated or just very committed, to the path, we kind of hit it running and we say we're going to give everything to it. But Uh, it's not possible to sustain a kind of high effort, high intensity intervention like needed when you have a child with a developmental disability over years. And most of us, within the first, I would say 7, 8 years, start to hit some kind of burnout. And I've talked with a lot of parents, and that's been their experience. It certainly was mine. By the time my son was 8, I'd had 3 children, and I was still dealing with basic things like not sleeping at night, working on sensitivity to food, his not being safe to walk on the street. You just a lot of difficulties with his regulation, and therefore my own regulation. I remember waking up thinking he's crying, and I was sure he was crying. And then I looked and he wasn't. So to the point where a lot of parents will describe the hyper awareness, the hyper vigilance that almost feels like a PTSD type of response because everything is dangerous. And as your child gets older, it feels more dangerous because it's no longer the cute baby stage that you can kind of grab and protect. And so for me, I needed to shift something for it to feel sustainable because I was anxious, panicked, tired, and just not sure how I would keep everything going in the way that I was doing it. And so I have a post I wrote in my Substack called Stop World, that moment when I said, hey, everything has to stop. I have to figure this out. And I reframed just how I was approaching this and started to focus on my own nourishment as just key to caring for my son. I can't care for my son without caring for myself. And that process, which has been a really long process, kind of led to a lot of the work I do now.
Stop world.
Hmm.
Seems
Yeah.
that in order to shift perspectives, which is so important in becoming anti-fragile, there's that shifting perspective that one has to stop.
Yeah. Agreed. I think that there is a mindlessness to our frenzy that the stopping is the way to kind of begin a more mindful approach to whatever it is that we're involved in. And so the world around us kind of pulls us into reaction. And for me, the stopping kind of meant I pulled therapies. I stopped a lot of things just so that I had the space to hear, first of all, myself Like what's going on for me? What do I see? What's my wisdom? And therefore how should I parent and how should I care and that kind of thing.
The next thing I think about is how does that expand the way we look at the world around us? How does that expand access in a real sense? And I use the term access very broadly.
Yeah, I think the first thing that you have to admit is that the reason we don't stop is because we're scared. That the idea of stopping feels scary because of all of our productivity markers and our goals and all this thing. And so the first thing I say to people to even have space to see the new things and possibly that expansion that we're talking about, you have to stop in a way that feels safe. So in the Caribbean, we'll talk about in the union type of setting, you talk about a work to rule when there's a strike. But if you're an essential worker in a strike, you stop working and yet you also maintain life. Like if you're in medicine or if you're in the healthcare system, you maintain essential functions. And I think I had to learn how to stop and also maintain the essentials so that my flight fright system would not become activated and run me back into the hamster wheel. So I made sure my son was safe. I made sure my family felt cared for. And I leaned back completely from a lot of the doing that I was doing. And that allowed me now the space to say, what really is happening here? What's really effective? What's really making a difference? And therefore, what should I do differently? And so, yeah, I think it creates expansiveness, but only if we're not frightened. Because when we're afraid, then that creates that narrowing, in our perspective.
So you were saying, as a matter of fact, when we're not afraid, when we stop and we look, then we are in a position where we can expand.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
now we begin to see that we can have access to lots of things that can be helpful,
Right.
that we can need. And we become inclusive in a very structured way.
Yeah, and I think you see, inclusion for me, it starts with the self. Inclusion is about cultivating that state of feeling like you belong. And I think the first person you need to feel like you belong to and with is yourself. And although inclusion, by definition, includes community, many of us can't even look outward into community without holding on to ourselves. Otherwise, you lose yourself to community. So for me, that first stop and that first assessment led me back into myself. What's going on for me? What do I love? What am I craving? What's my heart saying? And then from there, how do I build practices that say yes to what I want while also saying yes to my parenting journey? And so that double yes, part of what I work with clients on all the time is, yeah, say yes to you and to the mission. It's not an either or, it's not a zero sum game. And so when we can do that, but first it has to start with holding on to yourself.
We talk about as part of reframing is finding a better problem to solve that will take you from the uh, I to the we.
Mm,
So that you go from the very concerned I to the productive we.
right,
And what you're also adding to that is that if you don't start nonetheless with understanding that I, you cannot get to the productive we.
right. Because the we is, you and me, and often what we're doing is shutting off the individual self to try to understand the problem out there. What I had to notice is that the problem isn't out there with my son or services. The problem is in this arc, the relationship arc between me and the what I think is the problem, right? So it's the dynamic is what I want to hold on to. So it must be me and the other, we.
You talk about the restorative type culture. Tell us what you mean by that.
Yeah, so the word restorative, it means for me in my work, receiving at least the same as you're giving, but I say more. So it's about symbiosis versus parasitic relationships. A lot of our relationships in our work and in our care relationships in the nonprofit world and so on are parasitic. The thing that we're loving on takes from us and isn't giving back to us. And that's for us to redesign. And so my invitation to many leaders is to design work in ways that nourish and care for and support the workers as stakeholder number one. And so we want to create impact in society for the thems. And I'm like, if we're creating impact without creating impact for us, the ones who are doing the work, then we are being hypocritical. It's an ethical dilemma. So restorative work culture is an environment, it's an ecosystem that nourishes all the humans that are in the ecosystem.
How does the leader become nourished?
The leader is person number one. And so by definition, the leader, I tell leaders all the time, you're people too. So let's start with you. And one of the projects that I tend to put leaders through is, who are you and what are you craving? Because often a leader, I'm craving, a leader will say, I'm craving this thing to work well. I'm craving the staff to pay attention better. Yeah, but underneath that, what are you craving? If the leader can understand their core needs, then we spend a lot of time designing their workflow to meet their work core needs. And once they are a little bit more supported, then they have a little more space, like you're saying, a little more access to be able to guide their team into more restorative practices. But it becomes the same hamster wheel, like I talked about. If they are not nourished, then they are not good leaders. They're not caring for their people. Then you have this cycle of extraction, and then the people are therefore not caring for the leader, and it's everybody pointing fingers at everybody else and the system destroying everyone.
Want to tell us some of the things? Tell us a little bit more about some of the things that leaders and employees should be thinking about together as they think about the growth.
Yeah, I think that first thing we have to admit is that we are limited as humans in terms of what we can measure. But if we limit our practice to our limitations of instruments, then we're dead in the water, right? So psychologists have created measures for a variety of well-being things, and I could talk about that, happiness measures, etc. But fundamentally, humans understand themselves enough to be able to say when they're doing well. So the first measure is ask your people how they're doing. Ask your people if they feel good at work. Ask your people if they feel listened to. Ask your people if they have relationships, if they have friendships. Like, if we are not caring for fundamental human needs, which is relationships, autonomy, does your person, do the people on your team feel like they have the ability to do their work easily and well, and that they can control that, or are there obstacles in their way? If relationships, autonomy, competence, can they demonstrate what they know and feel good about that? Or is it constantly being either stolen by somebody else, or shrouded in some way, or limited by the way that work happens? I say ask people. So when people tell you their stories, believe them. Don't assume that a person is just being whatever, not working hard enough or whatever. Practice believing what people tell you.
Ms. Clarke, thank you very much. This has been really a very, very practical, and I think it will touch many, many of our audience. Thank you indeed, and
You're
have
welcome.
a restorative rest of the week.
Thank you so much, Dr. Douglas, and you as well.